And this is one song that I always played at the anniversary. It's called People's Park Forever Green. And I've recently updated one verse. It started back in '69. The time had come to cross that line, and Reagan's troops gassed, killed, and maimed. But still the people refused to be tamed. Bathed in struggle, blood, sweat, and toil, up came the concrete, back to living soil. People's Park, more than a grassy spot, it became a symbol for what could not be bought. For several years it was left alone, and there the homeless finally found a home. There was food when there was no wage, speeches and music from the concert stage. We put in swings and we planted trees, laid down the plumbing and the flower seed. But late at night, the university still came to destroy what they refused to build. And now you see, threatens once again, showing us a ruse disguised as a plan. Do they think they can lay down rules? Do they think we're so easily fooled? Don't they see that the spirit remains, one they can't stop with their fiscal gains? We'll work and fight if the need arise to keep the park green before our eyes. So tell me, where will it go from here? Can they own this land? Can they own the air? And I swear no building will be seen where the land must stay forever green. Where the land must stay forever green. Where the land must stay forever green. Well, Michael liked to dance, and so I'll do one that's a little upbeat song now. It's a composite of my women friends. It's called She's Something Else. Here she comes, strutting down the street with such style and that smile. Yeah, she can talk. She knows something about everything you know, and it shows. Her kids are all grown and she's out on her own. She's not putting her life on the shelf. She's gray and she ain't what she used to be. She's something else. Yeah, she can dance, using all the moves collected through so many years. Oh, and romance, she knows how to feel good and pass it on. Such fun. She already was young, been there, done that, enough. She wants to act just like herself. She's gray and she ain't what she used to be. She's something else. She's finally learned the word relax. She really wants to make it last. She took inventory, she likes her own story, and she's learned from everything in her past. Here she comes, she radiates such down-to-earth class that she has. Yeah, she's the one, knows all the skills she needs to get by. It's no lie. She's emotionally strong, knows what's right and what's wrong. Her experience is her greatest wealth. She's gray and she ain't what she used to be. Grade A and she ain't what she used to be. It's her day and she ain't what she used to be. She's something else. She's something else. She's something else. She's something else. And Michael was always right in front of at everything at the park, dancing away and with a big grin on his face. So. And this last one I'll play is one that I recently wrote, and so he didn't get a chance to hear it. It's called Lady Liberty Speaks. I have stood here, that's it. Okay, so now I'll put the capo on. I have stood here in this harbor near 140 years, torch hoisted high with an expression proud. And I've seen generations disembark upon this land in awe, as though they'd stepped on hallowed ground. Affixed upon my podium there is a poem that reads, give me you're tired, you're poor. Ah, but I've been feeling poorly and tired I have grown, to see what now is happening on my shore. I really cannot understand the way that things have changed, how immigrants are treated in this way. I wish the masses could be huddled neath the green folds of my skirt, to breathe a little easier for a day. And yes, there has been bigotry, too often there is cruelty, now rising exponentially in our land of opportunity. This explosion now of hatred, this propulsion now of scorn, makes me feel the copper crown I wear might as well be made of thorns. So I cry out for the children, abused and scared and caged, and weep to think of how we've fallen so far the wrong way. White power and no gun control, divisions, primal fears, while salt spray rising from the sea helps camouflage my tears. while salt spray rising from the sea helps camouflage my tears. Ooh.
I just want to say a couple things about Michael. He was so ever-present and so tenacious in his work, and he really did a lot of work. It was like the work of love, but a lot of hard work, you know. I don't remember when I first met Michael, but it was about 30 years ago when I first heard of him in his legendary stature. My friend Marcus often gave me a ride home from the shows at 924 Gilman and commented about the old hippie who was always there, dancing in his own style amidst slam dancers in the mosh pit. So I think that years later, when I realized that this activist Mardi Gras guy, who was celebrating all the time with Mardi Gras, and was the Michael Diehl, I was totally in awe. And I think it goes without saying, Michael was part of a deeply rooted, interwoven, and intersectional community, and his joy and tenacity and the fruits of his hard work were well distributed among many. Look around. Thank you all for coming.
Hi, I am Daniel, his younger brother. Didn't do any preparation for this because I'm kind of speak from the heart, and for me, like, you might get my opinion on things for the first couple of minutes, but then I have this higher power that kicks in and like shares stuff. Michael was a very, very unique child that I grew up with. I did not connect with him. My brother and my sister were always the top of their class, and I was dyslexic, and I was the bottom of my class. And that did not stop me from like always seeking people out. And I think that slowly started to rub off on like my brother and seeking people out. His first, up until the 8th grade, like he was very, very individualist, stayed to himself a lot. But by the time he hit high school, he started to realize that his voice and his thoughts could be very, very powerful. I remember him always wanting to be the president. In the 1st grade, he could recite every president in a row, and if you asked him, he could do every vice president. And I know someone wrote that, and they said it was the 3rd grade, but no, that was the 1st grade. And my grandmother was so impressed that she brought him down to the newspaper, and he did that, and they thought that was phenomenal. And then when he said, "Oh, I can do the vice presidents too," like, who's this kid who's like 6 years old that like can do all this stuff? I've never known anyone to read a whole encyclopedia set, but that was my brother. We had Encyclopedia Britannica. He read the whole thing. He just absorbed knowledge, and he could remember it. And so, like, that helped him, like, be able to do the stuff that he did. We used to go to school dances all the time, and I was the Motown kid. And he was the Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin kid. And I remember in the 8th grade, like, he had to go see Janis. And 6 months later, she was gone, but it was an opportunity for him to, like, really connect. And the nice thing is that because that was always playing in the background on one side, I really got to know what rock and roll was. He listened to what was called WBCM, which was like the college radio station. And I can tell you that I can do all Michael Jackson's moves, and my brother probably couldn't. But he grew up in a dancing family. My parents used to always be like the first one on the floor. So that might sound kind of familiar. Like, they didn't wait till they were drunk. They were the first ones on the floor. And they were amazing jitterbuggers. And that is something that, like, I have tried to learn, but I can't do. And I'm extremely jealous about that. I was on a cruise and they had, like, learn how to jitterbug, and all I could do was always put in my own little thing, and that would throw my partner off. Because I'm kind of a freestyle dancer. And, but that doesn't mean that I don't really appreciate that beauty of that, be able to dance with someone. And so anyway, we would go to these dances in high school, and like, I would watch my brother dance, and I always thought he was a little bit wilder than I would want to be. But later on, I had children, and one of them became a punk rock and roller. And like, I would have to take him because I didn't want him to get slammed in the mosh pit. So like, when he was 11 or 12, I was taking him to concerts to see like the Misfits and Rancid and all that stuff. And we had this band that was playing in the Village Green, and they were doing like a ska band. And my daughter was so impressed that like I could skank across the stage. And I said, well, I've been watching this since like 75, so like this new dance that you guys are doing probably evolved through my brother. And he came to visit us, and he bought like all the flyers that he did for Gilmore Street. And my son, being like a punk rock and roller, he treasures that stuff. And David made up this flyer, so he's going to get the original, so that will go with all those other flyers about his work with that. Definitely stayed with the music. He left being a rock and roller because the punk music was a definite statement about what was going on in society. And that was important to him. And it was a way for people to be able to release all that stuff. And Michael was always about releasing all that stuff. Like, we have it, we can do our work, but we need to release because otherwise we will explode. And it was watching him do the stuff that he did. And I used to always think, well, he should conform a little bit so that he could have sometimes how we change the world, sometimes it's important to get a seat with the people that are making the decision. But Michael figured out a way that he could do the stuff that he did without having to have that seat. He was so smart that he didn't have to move into that, like, I have to be who you want me to be before you listen to me. He would make people listen to him. And that was like truly a gift. So anyway, I went through my life. My job was to raise his siblings. I had 4 children. They're all unique individuals. I always like believe that like we accentuate our talents. And Michael was really good at accentuating his talents. You know, my sister was an extreme artist, and she did this portrait and ended up winning like National Scholastics Honors magazine, and her portrait was on the front page. And I remember the principal wanting to do a whole display because like she had won this for the school, but she denied them. And I wasn't aware of that. And the next year I was doing pottery, and I won a National Scholastics top 20 in the country. And I told him the same thing, not knowing that this Walter Wani, who was like the bane of the Diehls, I just couldn't give him credit for our individualistics. And the one thing I know about Michael is that even though he's not here, the way he affects people will continue through the people that are still in this park. And he will live through you people if you allow it. And that's really, really important. When I came here, like, I believe that, like, souls show up in butterflies. And there was this butterfly here that would not stand still, so I could take a picture of it. And that sounded so much like Michael. It wasn't about getting his picture taken or getting, like, accolades for the stuff that he did. He just did what he did because he loved to change the world in the manner that he did. Lo and behold, like, I did drug addiction and raised kids for like 30 years, and like I got clean 12 years ago. And the people around me, like, said, you're way smarter than you give yourself credit for. Because I had this, like, disease on me that, like, kept me pigeonholed from doing any, like, academics. Like, I was a slave to being a laborer. I happened to be, like, really good at that. So I became an efficiency expert. So whatever I could do, I could always do more than you. And I got encouraged to go back to school. So 6 years ago, I went back to Cape Cod Community College because, like, people love me enough to say, you are way more than you think you are. And I graduated out of there with a 3.89. And then I graduated out of school. I remember my principal calling up my father, and this is in the 8th grade, and says, your son has a 3rd grade reading level in the 8th grade, and we believe that it's his hair that is contributing to his delinquency. And my father wanted nothing to do with that, and he cut my hair, and he chased me around and did what my father did, just because he was who he was because of the way he was brought up. But I became the juvenile delinquent. Just because when people give us messages, sometimes we will conform to the messages that people tell us who we are. And what I found out after listening to that voice for 30 years is that I wasn't that person. And now I work in the substance abuse field, and what's kind of strange about all that is that, like, my brother's been helping people, and that he could connect with people, and I found out that I have the same gift. Yeah. I can talk about the voices that are inside your head. I know that I can empower people. It's those voices that make us change, and so we never know what the one thing is that we might say to someone to change their life. But if we don't say anything, nothing will change. So please be his voice. He is not dead. He is with you. And this is a celebration of his life, not a celebration of his death. Thank you.
Thank you. I've never used one of these before.
I hope I didn't miss
I found out that I was going to be speaking because I was online and I happened to see a poster about this event. And it said we're going to have some music to start off, and then we're going to have speakers. Danny and Arlene Diehl. I'm sorry. How come nobody told me that I was going to be speaking at this event? I want to start out by saying that I have been so moved on Michael's Facebook page at the outpouring of love that you all have been posting. I know Michael had gifts and also a really difficult life, and in his young life he was often quite misunderstood, and it's been so lovely to really get it, how deeply people did understand and revere who he was and who he became. think when I was a child, Michael and I were very, very close as children, and especially as adolescents. And I felt like a fierce little champion of Michael, because I got him, and it seemed like a lot of people didn't get him at the time. But I also, the family that I grew up in, I want to say we were 4 gifted loners and then 1 little social creature, my brother Dan, who was like lonely all the time because we were off. Michael was in his room studying, I was off with my sketchbooks. My parents were wild and very self-involved. So, anyway, I have been working on a little series on Facebook, on his page. I've done 5 writings about him as a child, and it starts out pretty much with him as a baby. I'm going to read from 3 of those chronicles, and the first one, I'm going to just kind of read little excerpts from it. The first one is kind of from when the time he was 12 to 15. So I'm going to start. In general, it is true that our mother often adopted a hands-off policy in regard to us, letting us unfold as we would. She does like to say, though, she only had 2 battles with Michael, one that she won and one that she lost. The first was that she wanted him to dance, which at 12 he seemed quite stubbornly opposed to. He was a little bit conservative, like at 11 and 12. It is obvious now to anyone who knew him that when Michael began dancing at 14, it was a win for Jolene and a win for a joyful life. And a family of 4 dancers became a family of 5 dancers. The second, more protracted battle which she waged over the course of his adolescence was that she wanted him to learn how to drive and acquire a driver's license, even if he never planned to own a car, which indeed was his principal plan. He saw early what the oil and gas industries were doing to the world, its people, and the planet. He wanted no part of any of this. She wanted him to have this option, even if just to be able to drive a loved one across the town in an emergency. But he never considered it, not ever. And so it was one for the world. At 14, a pretty major shift took place in Michael. He had quite some difficulty as a very young person with being ostracized for being different. But at 14, this shift took place. He had reached a point where he no longer seemed to care at all what other people thought of him. His anger, when it appeared, was focused on injustice and was no longer personal. This was enormously freeing for him. He became much more relaxed and also more joyful. This was a year he became an avowed feminist, and the first inklings that he would become a champion for oppressed peoples began to emerge. His capacity for empathy grew exponentially at this time, and his deep exploratory interest in and connection to music came to the fore as well. By the time he had turned 15, he was all in, with his deep, abiding curiosity about and ecstatic communion with music. Oops, she's gone. Hold on. Thanks for your patience. So at 15, Michael was devastated when Janis Joplin died. I remember his tears. Later that year, he gave away his only live Joplin album to me, because in it he heard her speak from the stage, and he found listening to this so deeply heartbreaking, and he felt very, very sad, because he knew then that Janice did not know how to love herself, and he was convinced that had she been able to embrace feminism on the deepest level, she would have lived and thrived. This is Michael at 15. Okay, let me read from the next chronicle is about him in the later years of high school. The years between 16 and 18 were a time of great activism for him. He had come to believe that the strictures of traditional education were strangling the creativity and vitality of young, inquisitive minds. He knew, for instance, that the school newspaper, Insight, was principally a mouthpiece for the status quo, for safe, boring, unthreatening journalism, a place where nothing of any import could be published about the actual lives of teenagers, nor was the development of critical thinking being at all encouraged within it. Believing in a free press, he decided to publish his own student newspaper where such questioning could proceed unimpeded. He called his paper Threshold. This undertaking required a huge commitment of his time, as he hand-wrote every article he received and then printed every copy on a little plastic hand-crank printer. It boggles my mind when I think of the enormous work and effort he put into making it happen. Nevertheless, he got his radical paper out, which included music reviews, political cartoons, editorials, and occasional critiques of the school and of some of the teachers employed at the school. This, among other things, caused the administration to view it as dangerous. When Walter Roney, the high school principal, caught wind and then sight of this, he out and out banned the distribution of Threshold at Barnstable High. Michael, being Michael, then promptly went to the local chapter of the ACLU, and they successfully backed him in his right to continue to publish and distribute his radical thoughts. In the meantime, it was also quite true that some of the teachers in our high school took great delight in Michael's intelligence, initiative, commitment, and nerve. One of his favorite classes was a social studies class that encouraged students to look into and report on critical issues of the day. And so, in 1973, it came to pass that my adventuresome brother traveled to Boston from our small hometown on Cape Cod to interview and hobnob with radical gay activists. And I believe he had a grand old time hanging out with such gutsy, politically edgy, and socially radical thinkers. I can only guess what the adult activist thought of his courage and initiative at 17, or ultimately what his small-town 17-year-old classmates thought of his report. Remember, this was a very different time when gay people were feared, reviled, and condemned. I know this well because 2 years later, while still a teenager, I myself came out.
All right.
However, by then, in regard to how his classmates received the import of his report, they probably already knew well that Michael was entirely invulnerable to ostracization by his peers, and so, as a result, he remained entirely uncategorizable. During these years, Michael also initiated and recruited both students and teachers for a work group committee whose mission it was to formulate and promote an alternative learning program at our high school, which would include student-created personal curriculum, interaction with the community at large, related apprenticeships and work study, as a hands-on learning program for students who would otherwise be stifled and/or bored in traditional settings, and undoubtedly underachieving as a result. I was on this committee. We met often and worked hard, probably ultimately also engaged and interacted with members of the Barnstable School District to get it instituted. The ALP was put through in 1974 and in turn became a real option for Barnstable High School students starting in 1975, the year after Michael and I left high school to begin higher education. Too late for us, but it became a godsend to our younger brother Dan, who was so grateful to have been able to attend. And so this became Michael's legacy and gift to future young students at Barnstable High. Amazing, amazing, amazing. All right, so I'm gonna read this from the last one I did. And then I'll let you all start.
You're fine, yeah. You're training perfectly.
I want now to write about Michael Diehl and the kinds of friends he cultivated in high school, and I have quite a story to tell in regard to this aspect of Michael's young life. Among human beings, he had, even then, a great appreciation for the marginalized, the disadvantaged, the offbeat, and the original. And so Michael counted among his friends many students who, like him, were socially ostracized for one reason or another, and in many cases were very sweet souls indeed, whom Michael thoroughly knew how to enjoy. In many cases, these marginalized students were the very people he recruited to write some of the most interesting and offbeat articles in Threshold, his independent student newspaper. Young people who had an original take on something, anything, and who sometimes, in fact, were experts in some obscure field or another. Michael was curious about everything, and very much admired and delighted in the hidden talents and fresh perspectives of those who were either timid or voiceless, or alternately rebellious and disruptive. He wanted them, in fact, to have a voice and a place where their voices could, in fact, be heard. And so he encouraged them to write, to participate in making Threshold the unique entity that it was. On the other hand, it is instructive to know that Michael was also very much admired by members of the student council, who were not only viewed as the, quote, smartest, unquote, and often, in fact, were intellectually rigorous students at the school. Unlike Michael, they were also, by virtue of class, physical attractiveness, upbringing, and advantage, highly popular and well thought of by students and teachers alike. Hence, their relative ease in being elected to student council. Michael's intelligence and chutzpah were not lost on them, and he was especially admired by and friends with senior class council members all through high school, even as a sophomore and a junior himself. He was often engaged by them for his original take on intellectual and philosophical questions, as well as prized for his political savvy. They were themselves young enough, encouraged, supported, and idealistic enough to imagine that they could have a real impact on the world, and they believed that merit should be appreciated wherever it was found. They found it in him, and often sought him out for a different perspective, and sometimes also for cogent advice. Michael was also the kind of teenager that the upper-class parents of these same students might have found objectionable. He was relatively unkempt. He broke long-established rules, was outspoken and radical. He may very well have been perceived as an unwanted and disruptive influence on their precious offspring. In retrospect, I would imagine that that may have been precisely part of Michael's appeal for these very same teenagers. Hence, the stage was set for the story I am about to relay. As is traditional at many or most high schools, the graduating student with the highest grade point average is chosen to be the class valedictorian. As valedictorian, that student would then be asked to speak at the graduation ceremonies, where the senior class would be receiving their high school diplomas and where parents and teachers and younger siblings would all be in attendance. It is a prestigious position to hold, and quite often is held up as an event that likely will bode very well for the future success of such an individual. As it happened, there appeared to have been a flaw in the calculation of the highest grade point average that year, whether technical or human, and it was then indicated that Michael was to be our class valedictorian. To any who were paying attention, and those students with the highest grade point averages would have been the most likely to have been paying attention, it would have seemed clear that an error had been made. Michael, by dint of his critical and hardly secret assessments of the school and of some of his own teachers, was unlikely to have been graded highly by some of those same teachers. And indeed, he had been treated unfairly, and in one case I know of, flunked out in one of those classes. It therefore could not be true that he had the highest grade point average in his class. Hang on. But perhaps because of the fear with which some of the faculty and administration viewed him, they may have been only too ready to believe that their worst nightmare had come true. Michael Diehl was the smartest kid in the class. Whether or not this was true, he certainly was the most courageous, principled, and fierce student they had ever encountered. And here's the kicker. It is clear that whomever was the actual valedictorian was also one of his student council friends. And that person, whomever he or she was willing to sacrifice the honor of being named valedictorian to the irresistibly delicious prospect of having Michael Diehl speak at the commencement that year.
Yeah!
And perhaps that person also felt that Michael deserved the honor most. We will never know. Of course, Michael and I viewed this turn of events with great delight and amusement, and it did seem to us that there had to have been some kind of silent student conspiracy to allow this to stand and for events to proceed as they did. So it did come to pass that in 1974, my brother Michael Diehl did in fact address the huge gathering. And I am terribly embarrassed to say that I remember almost nothing of the content of his actual speech. What I do remember was the lone black bobby pin that was lodged in his long black hair and how it glinted in the sunlight up there on his elevated podium. I do not know if he or my mother had used it in an attempt to keep his hair out of his face, or if it had been used to secure his graduation cap, which he clearly had taken off to deliver his commencement speech. I also remember that he shuffled papers, slurred his words, and mumbled as he spoke, as he had always been prone to do. Public speaking and public presentation were not his strengths, and I loved him no less for it. I'm entirely certain that there were others there who remember far more than I do about what undoubtedly was an intelligent, provocative, and radical speech for his age and time. Michael was at times crazy lucky, and other times he experienced a great deal of hardship, but ultimately always found a way to put a humorous and sometimes even joyous spin on whatever happened. Michael was nothing if not alive and engaged, and if it's not obvious to everyone by now, I thought the world of him. Thank you all so much.
He was also on the Berkeley Mental Health Commission and a rep for the Berkeley Mental Health Services Act consumer group, and understood the bureaucracy, limitations, and risks of services available to people in psychological crisis. It seems he was always involved in some form of support or advocacy, though his college degree was in elementary and early childhood education. Already in high school, he helped set up an alternative learning program that continued long after he graduated, and later he was a student teacher in several free schools. Our work together began in the collective's free school classes about alternatives to psychiatry and the conventional mental health system. One of the classes Michael helped facilitate was about trauma, which he felt was at the core of the emotions and behaviors that are labeled mental illness, and misrepresented as medical problems rather than socio-political problems. But he wasn't just focused on psychology or pedagogy, but got involved with Copwatch, the mobilization to free Mumia Abu Jamal, and other prison issues. Often lacking housing himself, he defended the right to sleep on the street, got involved in the resistance to .com gentrification in San Francisco's Mission District, participated in the campaign for Oakland's Just Cause Renters Protection Ordinance, helped revive the Berkeley Homeless Union, and camped out at the Arnieville protests. One of the last times I saw him was at an event in defense of the eucalyptus forest in the East Bay Hills, where it turned out he was squatting at the time. But long before it was an immediate personal need, he helped mobilize support for Earth First in the battle with Maxam in Stafford and a boycott of stores that sold lumber from old-growth redwoods. Michael used whatever tools at his disposal to try to communicate with the world around him. As a teenager, he wrote a column on high school for a local weekly, The Register, and published his own underground high school newspaper called Threshold. In the 1990s, he got involved with Free Radio Berkeley, did some of the radical news, and as DJ Adversary, programmed several shows over the years, including for Humane Services for the Mentally Crisis, talking about mental health from a radical anti-psychiatry perspective, as well as Y2K Metanoia, Visions of Monocultural Dystopia, Visions of the Kali Yuga, and finally, most recently, The Liberation of the Wretched. In 1999, he joined in the defense of KPFA. We all know Michael as a peacemaker. He believed that conversation has the power to clarify and heal and make a better world, but he also knew when it was time to stop talking and to take action instead. When fascist boneheads who liked to show off their Klan tattoos kept showing up at Gilman Street Project, the all-ages punk club in Berkeley, he finally lost his patience and declared, "Enough with the peace punks, let's kick the Nazis out of here." Yes. And he helped in an infamous effort to, shall we say, escort the not very willing bigots out of the club. Yeah. He knew which side he was on. In fact, in college, he declined an offer from a questionable friend to get involved with the CIA, apparently while listening to the Sex Pistols, and firmly responded, "Fuck that, they're the enemy. I'm a punk." Shortly after Michael joined the Bay Area Radical Mental Health Collective, he arranged space at the Berkeley Free Clinic, where he had been a long-time peer counselor, for us to start a support group, which he kept going long after the collective disbanded. On a personal level, I especially appreciated that he made himself available to provide support for one of my family members after 6 weeks of involuntary drugging and incarceration on the psych ward. I hear that recent participants plan to continue the group, and I know that Michael would be thrilled. It was always his intention that part of its purpose would be to learn together how to do them, and that guidelines for what constitutes meaningful support would evolve out of the group itself, not from a facilitator. The support group was intended to be a place where you can bring whatever troubles you without getting preached at, and you're welcome to get political about it. But Michael was a little more poetic about it, and I would like to end by giving him the last word. Traumatized by abusive, violent, waking nightmares from the past, caught up in a mental recession turning into a major economic mental depression meltdown, not feeling that euphoria, this was around Obama, around the post-inauguration audacity of hope, incapable of fitting into the brave new world of happy sedation and corporate newspeak brainwashing, not comfortably numb from filling your inner void with meaningless eco-death consumption of products and artificial food, chemicals, domesticated and doped up factory farm animals, built, corralled by exploited slave labor and plastic humans, or unable to, now that your debt has ran you over the foreclosure cliff, out of gas, burnt out, unplugged into that abyss that is homelessness and criminalization and incarceration and other institutional forms of compassionate care for your own good? Well, maybe it's time to go to the Radical Mental Health Collective support group on Monday night. And maybe after that, you won't be comfortable or numb anymore, or at least for a while. Or tune into Free Radio Oaklandish, 104.1 FM, Sunday noon to 2 p.m. And listen to DJ Adversary agitate you with rants against the empire and music to stir up your stultified emotions on the Liberation of the Wretched show, provided you are in range of the pirate signal. Or go online to look for Berkeley Liberation Radio. Unplug the Matrix, chase the White Rabbit, go to the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, tear down the wall.
My name's David. And it's nice that we have this event here right across the street from the Berkeley Square. That's where I first laid eyes on Michael Diehl as a teenager, coming in from the suburbs to go to my first punk rock shows. And I remember the very first time I saw him, looking at him, saying, "Oh my God, is that what I'm going to turn into?" It was true. It was true. It happened. I also wondered, is he a punk or is he a hippie? And yes, he was. Yeah. We're going to have some. This is the last. I'm the first of the circle people. Going to sing a song, but after. We're going to not get in a big circle like we'd imagine, but we're going to kind of scooch our chairs in and look at each other, and we're going to pass the microphone around from person to person and share our very brief, please, very brief memories and thoughts around Michael. It's going to get chilly and cold. People are going to get hungry, so we're going to try to do it in a brief way, if that's okay. And also, if you can help make a donation to help make this, having paid for this, Luna right there in the shirts. We'll accept checks written out to Friends of People's Park? People's Park Defense Fund. Or cash. I'm going to sing a song about when people die. It's kind of a spiritual song from the Tibetan whatever, where after someone dies, their soul stays with us, wanders around the earth for a certain amount of time, 49 days, and before it goes on to the next level. And that's around the time, right around now, where we can wish, if we go that way with thinking about Tibet, we can look to Michael around and within us and wish him success in his journey onwards. Sometimes the soul needs a little. Sometimes the soul needs a little comforting and help because they're not prepared, and sometimes, and I think the case with Michael, they are unquestionably wise old souls who know what they're doing. So this song is called 49 Days. 49 days to get where you're going. It seems like forever to me. 49 days of wandering, waiting in a heartbeat. Everything changed. 49 days. Eternity. You weren't prepared for your journey, or were you? Some things are just meant to be. I hear your voice, I wake up in the night. You're crying in confusion. I'll comfort you, dear. My tears and heartache help you on your way. Maybe I envy your freedom a little. Cares of the world left behind.
both student interns. I was a student at UC Berkeley who was planning to take some time off of school and join the staff at St. George full-time, and Michael was on cooperative, whatever they call it at Antioch, where you have to go out for 6 months and learn about something besides your own college campus. So there we were working with teens who had been dubbed the craziest people in the state of California. And it was quite an experience. I can't tell everything I know about Michael. We would go years without seeing each other, and then we would reconnect, and we're an important part of each other's lives and families. I ran into Michael when I had first moved back to the East Bay, and I better remember to keep my eyes open if people are going to be flashing lights at me, in 1996 or 1997. We were both at a protest against benefits for single parents who are receiving welfare. And he said, I know you, aren't you Judith? And I'm like, Michael, where do you live? He said, North Oakland. I asked him where. I said, I'm right around the corner from you. And oh, by the way, I remember that you've taught preschool before, and I have a 2-year-old. Would you like to help me out some? I could use a babysitter. Michael's bonds with my child were deep and lasting. I couldn't have made it as a single parent if I didn't have Michael to walk her places, ride on public transportation, go a lot of places. I managed to help Michael get a job at the preschool there. It's hard for me to say everything that Michael meant, but his warmth, his quirkiness, his just willingness to be who he was were incomparable. It's really hard for me to say all the things that Michael meant to me, but in some ways I realized that he was kind of a scary figure for a lot of us, because he wasn't going to fake it till he made it. He was going to make it on his terms or not at all. And all the times I tried telling people when we were young and I worked at St. George, hey, wait a minute, they got me confused with somebody else. I'm not Michael Diehl. Well, I got news for you guys. I am Michael Diehl. That's it. Can I hear everybody here say it? If you feel that, say, I am Michael Diehl. I am Michael Diehl. He lives on in the rest of us. I got to go take food down off the porch as part of Food Not Bombs, and I'll be back a little bit later in the evening.
Hello. My name is Andrew Phelps. I was, among many things, the first chair of was a mental health client for the Berkeley Mental Health Advisory Board, now Commission. And Michael later took that position, and because we felt that the MAD had to run the system, and we did the very best that we could. And I've worked with Michael many times in many places, with deep admiration for his way of being, and considered him a very strong ally. And I got to know him on a national basis when we did organizing in Boston even. And I found out that his Puritan his background involved the Native Americans in a different way than my own. And so we learned to talk about things at the level of the difference between different Native American perspectives. That's how deep it was. And anyway, I'm just deeply honored to be here, and it breaks my heart.
Hi, I'm Delphine. I was friends with Andrew for at least 2 decades. Excuse me. I was friends with Michael for at least 2 decades. And I also have to leave early, sorry. I'm visiting from Sacramento. Michael and I collaborated on Berkeley Liberation Radio. I was the pirate radio DJ known as Greta Garbage. And he was DJ Adversary. And together we took on so much injustice in the world. And we also were there with Andrew in Boston to support MAD Liberation, even in collaboration with dissident psychologists. We did we fought the good fight for mental health policy throughout California, and here in Berkeley. We fought against police violence. I was there during one of Michael's support groups at the Berkeley Free Clinic for folks who were doing social justice work, who experienced trauma, as so many of us do in this work. And Michael was decades ahead of his time. Back when I was still a kid, he was already creating an alternative school newspaper and an alternative college within his own college campus. And he had the idea too that, I mean, for Michael, being an anarchist and being a socialist and also engaging in civic leadership were not contradictions, but were essential coexisting acts of liberation. Just as being spiritual and being intellectual were for him an important part of his being. And these were concepts that people have not reconciled yet. He was ahead of our time so far before now. And these were ideas that I feel strong kinship with Michael about. And I only wish that I was able to spend more time with him in the last few years since I moved to Sacramento. I miss him terribly. Thank you all for being here.
I had the joy and honor of meeting Michael Diehl in 1982 at Glenn Turner's home in Berkeley, along with Grady McNerney and several others. Michael was a priest and a deacon for the Ordo Templi Ordinalis, and he is dearly missed. In fact, in two temples, Temple Sophia as well as Temple Blazing Star, we rang the bell for Michael, and we had a greater feast. And this morning I also joined in ringing the bell for Michael and having a greater feast, because we knew this was the last day that he would have a celebration of his life, so we definitely wanted to have it 3 times. And let's see, what about Michael? Michael was always there for me. If I was in a bad mood or sad or whatever, if I was happy, he would share in my reveille. If I was sad, he would make me feel better. I worked on Proposition 215, and Michael would be one of my major cheering points in making sure that medical cannabis was legal in the state of California. I would run into Michael at many events, many protests, and the war. We fed the hungry together through Food Not Bombs. I also had the honor of being on Radio Free Berkeley, known as the Holy Hemptress, because that's what I am. I am the Holy Hemptress through my life's work, and the name was given to me in a circle and a prayer. I really, in 1998, that happened. I was a part of Oz House, which Michael was also a part of Oz House, and he was a guiding light. He saved lives. He went out of his way to make sure that people that were homeless got the treatment and the help that they needed, and the mentally ill got the treatment that they needed. He was a beacon. He was a leader of free speech. And because of that, we have to make sure that the People's Park remains. We have to make sure, in honor of Michael Diehl, that that park never closes and never becomes just an apartment building for students, because there's just too much historical value there. And Michael gave his life to that. And so I'm asking the people of Berkeley and the people here tonight to please help us to have that park remain open. There's just many moments. It's like I'm having in a flood of all kinds of things with Michael. Him showing me his artwork when it was finished, and just, being a part of his life, and 37 years of that. And to find out that he just, boom, it's over. But his spirit is with us, and it's really not over. I mean, all we have to do is think about his twinkle in his eye and the smile on his face, and how, at the People's Park, he'd get down to the Funky Nixons, And we'd always dance to the Funky Nixons. And the Funky Nixons were actually one of his very favorite bands, as well as me. I love the band too. And I'm just, it's a pleasure and to be with you all this evening in his honor. And just take what he taught us and take the knowledge that he gave to us and apply it. And don't stop until you get your way. And may that way be to help humanity, to help the environment, and to make a better tomorrow and today. Thank you, Michael, for everything. I love you very much. Holy Hampshire out.